There are moments when a nation builds something so far ahead of its time that even its greatest rivals are forced to pause, stare, and quietly admit, we are not ready for this. The Cold War wasn't just a contest of missiles and soldiers. It was a contest of imagination, engineering, and nerve. And at the center of that contest, the United States created a jet-black aircraft that flew faster than fear itself. It didn't just cross the sky, it erased it. One moment, the Soviets would see a blip appear on radar, fast enough to trigger the kinds of alarms reserved for missile launches, and the next moment, that blip would already be gone, climbing higher, running farther, leaving behind nothing but confusion and clenched jaws. The aircraft was the SR-71 Blackbird, and to Soviet pilots and commanders, it represented a humiliating truth. You can't stop what you can't catch. The first time Soviet radar operators truly understood what they were looking at, the reaction wasn't confidence, it was disbelief, followed by panic. Imagine a dim control room thick with cigarette smoke. Operators leaning forward, headphones on, eyes locked to the glowing glass of analog screens. A bright blip appears, then accelerates like it's ignoring physics. Orders snap across the room. Phones get grabbed. Chairs scrape. A hand points hard at the scope, as if pointing could slow it down. Interceptors are requested. Missiles are put on standby. And for a few tense seconds, it feels like they've finally caught the Americans red-handed. But then, the target does the one thing Soviet doctrine was never designed to handle. It simply goes higher and faster until the numbers stop making sense. Because the Blackbird didn't need to be invisible to win, its most devastating weapon wasn't secrecy. It was speed. Speed so extreme it broke the chain that air defenses depend on. Detection is supposed to lead to interception. Interception is supposed to lead to destruction. The SR-71 shattered that logic. Soviet commanders could see it. They could track it. They could throw everything they had at it. And still, the Blackbird would leave them staring at the screen, watching a target they couldn't reach outrun every law of air defense they believed in. That is why Soviet pilots hated it. Not because it embarrassed them in public, but because it embarrassed them in private, where pride matters most. To understand how America built something so untouchable, you have to start with humiliation. In 1960, the United States learned painfully that altitude alone was no longer protection. The U-2, which had once seemed like a sky-high ghost, was shot down over Soviet territory. Washington realized that the old advantage was fading. If the United States wanted to keep eyes on the Soviet Union, it needed a machine that turned the entire sky into a shield, flying so high and so fast that even if it was detected, nothing could reach it in time. That requirement sounds simple until you actually try to build it. At Mach 3, the air itself becomes an enemy. Friction heats the aircraft like a furnace. Metal expands. Fuel becomes dangerous. Engines need to inhale massive volumes of air without tearing themselves apart. And the smallest design mistake at those speeds doesn't cause a normal crash. It causes a disintegration. At Lockheed's legendary Skunk Works, a small team led by Kelly Johnson accepted the challenge with the mindset that separated them from everyone else. Assume it can be done, then figure out how. But there was a problem so absurd, it sounded like fiction. To survive Mach 3 heat, the aircraft needed huge quantities of titanium, light, strong, heat-tolerant. And who controlled a major share of the world's titanium supply? The Soviet Union. So the United States did what Cold War America did best. It turned desperation into audacity. Titanium was purchased through layers of dummy companies and intermediaries so the Soviets wouldn't realize they were selling the metal that would become the spine of the aircraft designed to watch them. Even then, working with titanium was like entering a new industrial age overnight. It was hard on tools, difficult to machine, unforgiving in manufacturing. Entire processes had to be invented just to shape and assemble it. And then came the engineering miracles, plural. At those speeds, the Blackbird skin heated so much that panels that fit perfectly on the ground would expand in flight. To make the panels fit tight in the air, they had to fit loose on the ground. That meant the plane could leak fuel while sitting still, puddles under a machine that looked like it belonged in the future. And the fuel itself couldn't be ordinary. Traditional fuel would be too volatile at high temperature, so a new fuel was developed, JP-7, built to stay stable under heat that would make other aircraft sweat and fail. It was the kind of problem-solving that defined the program. Not one breakthrough, but dozens stacked on top of each other, each one necessary, each one risky. When the SR-71 finally entered the world, it looked like something from another timeline. Part aircraft, part spaceship, sharp lines, black skin, an unnerving stillness even when parked. But the real shock came when it moved. The Blackbird didn't fly the way other aircraft flew. It roamed the edge of space. It cruised above 80,000 feet and beyond, at around 3 times the speed of sound, faster than a rifle bullet. That speed wasn't a brag. It was the entire concept. Because at Mach 3, the window to intercept shrinks into almost nothing. Air defenses can't hold a conversation with a target that's gone before they finish speaking. Fighter jets can't climb fast enough to reach it. Missiles don't have time to solve the geometry. The Blackbird turned reaction time into the enemy. This is where the fear started. Soviet air defense networks were built to respond to intruders with a sequence: detect, track, assign, launch, intercept. The SR-71 forced that sequence to operate at a tempo it was never designed for. Even when Soviet operators tracked it, the numbers looked wrong. Speeds that spiked, altitudes that stretched, courses that changed beyond what they expected. It was as if the intruder was playing a different game, using different rules. And every time they tried to respond, the Blackbird reminded them, "Seeing me doesn't matter." So the Soviets adapted. Because they had to. They developed faster interceptors and improved missiles. They worked on aircraft like the MiG-25, built in part to chase extreme-speed targets. They refined radar coverage and command and control. They tightened readiness, but the harsh truth remained. Even a faster interceptor is still an interceptor. It still has to take off, climb, reach the correct point, and arrive within seconds of a target that is already leaving. Meanwhile, the Blackbird did what it was built to do: gather intelligence with a precision that reshaped decision-making in Washington. It photographed missile sites, it mapped deployments, it monitored crises, and it did it while staying just out of reach, like a shadow that refused to be grabbed. This is the part most people misunderstand. The SR-71 wasn't invincible. It was difficult, it was expensive, it demanded an elite crew. It required discipline and constant attention. At those speeds, small errors become fatal. The aircraft didn't forgive sloppy thinking. There were test flights where things went wrong in ways that felt like nightmares, moments where the plane's extreme performance pushed it toward catastrophe. But the program survived its disasters, learned from them, and kept moving forward. And once the Blackbird matured, it carried a record that still stuns aviation. Not a single SR-71 was ever lost to enemy fire. Imagine what that does to the mind of a pilot tasked with stopping it. You're trained to believe skill and speed can solve most problems. You're trained to believe that if you see the enemy, you can engage the enemy. But the Blackbird forced a different psychological reality. Soviet pilots could scramble, climb, strain their aircraft to limits, and still realize they were chasing a target that was already somewhere else. You can't outturn it if you can't reach it. You can't outclimb it if it's already above you. You can't outthink it if it's built around making your decisions arrive too late. That helplessness is poison to confidence. And confidence is everything in air combat. That's why the SR-71 became more than a reconnaissance aircraft. It became a statement. It told the world that American engineering could take an impossible requirement and force it into reality. It told adversaries that the United States could watch without being touched. And in a Cold War defined by uncertainty, by secrets, by hidden deployments, by the fear of sudden escalation, the ability to know mattered as much as the ability to strike. Intelligence is power. The Blackbird was built to deliver knowledge at a speed nobody could deny. It was, in a very real sense, a sentinel for the free world, an aircraft that helped prevent miscalculation when the world was on the brink of nuclear war. And so we return to that Soviet radar room. The smoke, the harsh light, the operator staring at a scope as the blip streaks across the screen, the officer barking orders that won't change anything, the feeling that the intruder has broken the logic of your defenses. For the Soviets, the Blackbird wasn't terrifying because it bombed cities or destroyed fleets. It was terrifying because it made them feel exposed, because it proved the sky above them wasn't theirs to control. Their greatest humiliation wasn't defeat. It was helplessness. The SR-71 didn't destroy Soviet assets. It destroyed Soviet certainty. Years later, when satellites began to take over reconnaissance, the world moved on. Digital intelligence replaced film canisters, but the memory of the Blackbird never faded. For the Americans who built it, flew it, and relied on it, and for the adversaries who watched it pass and realized they couldn't do a thing. In the end, the SR-71 wasn't just about speed or altitude or even stealth. It was about what happens when a nation refuses to accept the limits everyone else believes are fixed. It was the sound of America running faster than the world could follow, and leaving its greatest rivals staring upward at a sky it could no longer claim to control.